Hey friends, it's Julia. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be going over how to can dry beans with a pressure canner for long-term storage. So why would you want to can beans? Well, it's really cheap. You can buy a 20-pound bag of black beans or pinto beans at Walmart for under $15. And this 20-pound bag will make a lot of jars of canned beans. Each quart jar that you only use 1 1/4 cups of dry beans to fill it up. So this will can, I don't even know how many quarts of dry beans, but a lot. So that's one reason. Another reason you would want to can dry beans at home is because the beans that you buy at the store are not processed correctly. So they're not pre-soaked to eliminate the phytic acid. And so they will cause more gas, and the anti-nutrients in it from the phytic acid can actually deplete your body of nutrients instead of nourishing your body. So the first thing you're going to do is grab a large stock pot and determine how many quarts at a time you're going to be canning. Most pressure canners, like mine back here, is a Presto pressure canner, can 7 quarts at a time, which is about 9 cups of dry beans. So you fill your pot up with about 9 cups of beans, and actually that's almost a quarter to a third of my pot here, and then triple it with water. So you'll fill your beans up to here, fill the water up to here, and let it soak for 12 to 36 hours. Now, most people stop there, but I'm going to let you in on a little secret. If you add about 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar to your soaking beans, the apple cider vinegar will break down the undigestible sugars in your beans and make them much easier on your digestion so you don't have as much gas. Okay, after your beans are done soaking between 12 and 36 hours, I did mine for 36 hours this time. When they're done, what you want to do is drain the water off and rinse them really good, and then drain them again, and then fill your pot back up with water and simmer it on a low heat for about 30 minutes on your stove. This will cook the beans partially. They're not going to be anywhere near done, but it just helps get the process going so that they can cook all the way when you pressure can them. So I'm just adding 3 quarts of water and a few tablespoons of vinegar to my pressure canner to get it ready. Okay, so my beans have simmered for 30 minutes, and now I'm just going to use a ladle and fill my jars, leaving a good 1.5 inch headspace at the top. 1.5 to 1.25 inches of headspace at the top, because the beans will still expand more when they're cooking. After your jars are filled and topped off with broth or liquid to about 1.25 inches, you're going to use a debubbler or a butter knife and just kind of poke around in the jar and make sure that you remove any air bubbles that might be hiding down there, and make sure that the water level at the top is adjusted correctly so you're at 1.25 inches of headspace. Okay, this is an optional step. I am adding salt to each jar. I'm using 1/2 teaspoon of salt to these 1.5 pint jars. They're not 2 quarts, they're about 1.5 pints. And you could use up to a teaspoon of salt if you wanted to. But I like to go a little bit light on the salt now, and then you can add more later when you cook it if you like. After I am done with the salt, I am going to use some white distilled vinegar on a clean tea towel,
And I am going to just gently make sure that all the rims of the jars are nice and clean, that there's no beans or bean juice or salt on those, so that the lids can seal correctly without having any problems. There's nothing more frustrating than having a jar that doesn't seal after all your effort. Now I am placing the clean lids. These are brand new lids. Always use new clean lids on my jars. And then I will screw the bands on to finger tight. You don't want to crank the bands on because you will probably have a hard time getting them off. And you want to make sure they're tight enough that they're going to hold the lid in place throughout the pressure canning process.
Okay, when you're ready to start canning, the first thing that we need to do is prep our pressure canner. And for most canners like mine, that means adding 3 quarts of water to the bottom of your pressure canner. You'll also want to make sure that you have the removable plate on the bottom of your pressure canner to prevent your food from scorching. So place this inside your pressure canner. Then add 3 quarts of clean water. And then what we're gonna do is inspect our lid. So we need to, every time we can, we need to inspect our lid. You need to remove your rubber ring and inspect it all the way around for any cracks and make sure that it's all intact and working well. And then you'll also want to inspect your vent hole and make sure that the air can go through there and there's nothing blocking it. A lot of times I like to just look through it. You can look through it and see daylight, or you can blow through it, which I do too, and make sure it's working. Also, you want to check this pressure button. This pops up when your pressure canner comes to pressure, is under pressure, it'll pop up. And make sure that's working right, and then make sure your little emergency button here is on and working right. And then make sure that you have your weights. So this is a weighted pressure canner instead of a dial pressure canner. And this recipe calls for 10 pounds of pressure, but because I am well above sea level, I am using 15 pounds of pressure to pressure can my beans. So each of these is 5 pounds of pressure. So this is 5 pounds of pressure, and then each ring is another 5 pounds of pressure. And there's 15 pounds of pressure.
Okay, my pressure canner is prepped and I am just going to load it with my jars. Then I'm going to show you the lid. There's 2 arrows on it, one on the lid itself, it's etched into the metal, and the other is on the handle. Just heating up my pressure canner now, turning that on to a medium-high heat. And I'm going to line up these arrows together to lock my lid into place.
A medium heat and let it come up to pressure, let it come up to heat. And what you're gonna do is just let it steam through the vent hole for at least 10 minutes. So you wanna wait until you see steam coming out of your steam vent hole before you set your timer for 10 minutes. So then you set your timer for 10 minutes, and when that 10 minutes is up, then you can place your weights on top. But it's still not time to set your timer for the processing time of your food, because we have to wait till this starts rocking back and forth. Once the weights start rocking back and forth and this pressure gauge is up, that means that your pressure canner has come up to pressure and it is ready to start the timer. 1 quart of beans, each quart of beans will process for 90 minutes. If you're doing pint jars of beans, those will process for 75 minutes. And when your weights start doing a little dance, that's when you set the timer for the processing time.
So I'm just locking my lid into place, turning it on, and I want to give you guys a little shot of what it looks like when the steam is coming out of the vent hole. It's kind of hard to get on camera, but you can hear it coming out and you can see it coming out at the right angle. And you're going to let that steam vent through that vent hole for 10 minutes. After that 10 minutes is over, you can go ahead and put your weights on top, and then you wait for your weights to start jiggling before you set your timer. Okay, so my weights are jiggling. Just going to give you guys a little idea of what that looks like. You don't want them going too crazy, but this is about right. So I still have it on a medium heat. Every time it rocks, it lets off a little bit of pressure to keep it at 15 pounds of pressure in the pressure canner. So now my processing time has started, and I set my timer. When it's up, I will just turn the oven off, or the stovetop off, and let it cool down naturally. Processing time is up, so I'm just going to turn this off and let it cool down naturally.
Okay, so your jars have been processing for 90 minutes for quart jars or 75 minutes for pint jars. And when your timer goes off, all you're going to do is turn your stove off. Turn the heat off.
Okay, I waited a lot longer to open my pressure canner than you have to. What you really need to do is, if you're in a time crunch, is wait till the pressure releases naturally in your pressure canner, so the pressure button has gone down. Then you can remove your weights, wait a few minutes, then you can remove your lid, then wait at least 10 more minutes, and then you can remove your jars safely. Your jars are still going to be super hot. They'll actually still be boiling inside the jars, and you need to be really careful when you remove them to not tilt them or knock them around, because the seals are not completely set yet.
I let mine rest for hours before I remove the weights, and sometimes I will, if I'm canning at night, I will just leave it on the stove until the next morning, and then I can safely remove the weights and remove the lid, because it's completely come down from pressure and cooled off naturally. If you do not want to wait overnight, that's fine, but you need to let it come down and release its pressure naturally. Then you can remove the weights from the top, wait a few minutes, then open the pressure canner, unlock it, and there won't be any pressure in there, so it'll be just fine, but your jars will still be very hot. In fact, they're still going to be boiling inside your jars. So after you remove the lid from your pressure canner, leave the jars in your pressure canner for at least 10 more minutes so that they can naturally acclimate to before you remove them from the pressure canner. Then when you do remove those hot jars from your pressure canner, you're going to want to use a jar lifter, or you're going to want to use a hot pad, because those jars are still going to be super hot. You'll want to place them on I like to put them on a washcloth or a safe place to cool on the counter where they're not going to be touched, because if you handle a hot jar right after it has come out of the canner, the seal is not set in stone. Like this seal, this has been cooling overnight. So now I can hold onto the seal and it will hold the weight of the jar. And the vacuum inside this jar holds that lid on tight. But when it first comes out and it's boiling hot, that seal is not set. So you want to make sure that you're not tipping your jars when you take them out. You want to make sure you're just taking them out carefully and setting them somewhere where they're not going to be touched until the next day. And then the next day you can go ahead, remove your bands, wash your jars off if they're not clean. My jars are clean because I add a couple tablespoons of white distilled vinegar to my pressure canner before I turn it on. Then the next day, go ahead, remove your bands, wash up your jar. You might want to label your jars and just put the date or the year on here so that you know how long these have been on the shelf and you can rotate accordingly. And then go ahead and store them on your pantry shelf.
I hope that this video answered any questions that you might have about how to preserve dry beans safely and how to use your pressure canner. If you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. I always respond to those. I will also leave a link in the description below to a recipe card that you can print off on the blog farmhouseharvest.net. Thank you so much for watching my channel. As always, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. We'll see you next time.